All right. All right. So we are live and we are going to get started on a topic that is really important, I think, especially in today's environment. By the way, I realize that the title is a bit misleading. I included receive feedback. That actually is not going to be our focus for today. I grabbed a title slide from a different presentation where I included both. I had more time. So please ignore those couple of words. The focus is on sharing feedback effectively, or as I indicated in the title, how to share feedback like a boss. Now, frankly, I think that might be a bit of a misnomer because oftentimes we think of a boss as somebody who's a bit top down. And what I want to do today is talk about how we can provide feedback in a way that doesn't quite feel like a boss, but feels more like a concerned supervisor, somebody who has to provide feedback, but does so in a way that is caring, concerning, demonstrates empathy, and a variety of other factors that we will talk about. In fact, I presented this recently to a group and I got some pushback, so I welcome your pushback as well as it relates specifically to how to do this in a way that constantly keeps the focus on trust building, constantly keeps the focus on helping people feel motivated, cared for, nurtured, etc. Because in this environment where many of us are working remotely, or at least have been working remotely for a long time, the idea that we have so many gaps to our communication as it is must be front and center because any feedback that we're giving to people, when you can't be in the same space as somebody else, if you're not developing the face-to-face interactions with people on a regular basis, it is harder to give feedback. That's a fact. I was talking to a principal today, and he told me that he has some teachers who he has to make some decisions about with regards to next year, or at least maybe not in terms of employment, but specifically regarding, let's say, grades or other assignments and things of this sort. And those challenges, like I said, they're real. So we want to talk about them. We want to provide real solutions for everybody here that are going to allow you to effectively lead conversation around goals and other factors. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Some of you may not be so familiar with me, and frankly, I actually didn't do this yet. I'm back. It's been a while. Took a few weeks off for a variety of reasons and decided that now was a good time to give it a go again. So for those of you who have been with me before, thank you. Thank you for your trust. Thank you for being here as part of this community. And for those of you who are new, welcome. For those of you who don't know me, I am a former educator and school leader turned executive coach. So I work with principals and nonprofit leaders as well as business owners and for-profit leaders, helping them in a variety of different ways, managing their time, becoming more focused on time management, on doing the right work, really on being a leader. And being a leader does include providing feedback to the right people on a regular basis, formal and informal. We're not going to go through both of those right now, but hopefully you'll be able to apply the rules and the tools that we present today to different situations that are relevant to you. So that's my backstory, and I'm excited to be with you today. And let's do some learning. Before we jump into it, I'm noticing that some of you still, maybe some of you who came on a little bit later, have your chat still set to all panelists only. So please go into the chat, make sure that you select the drop-down feature towards the bottom and choose all panelists and attendees. And this way, anybody who you want to share ideas with a whole group, hopefully, they'll be able to grab that because of the fact that you are sharing it with everybody. Now, here is a link for the certificate. If you go to this page, which I just included in the chat as well, and you scroll to the bottom, then you will find a link to a certificate. So anybody who needs something for participating today or would like to have a certificate, they are DIY, which means you do it yourself. But the idea, frankly, is that you are going to be just putting in key information, your name, today's date, a few other variables, and of course, the topic of today's session. And I think if you cover that, you have covered everything. So that's my little, I guess, technical presentation before we jump into the specifics. And I also wanted to mention, some of you may have gotten an email from me about this. I am really close to getting started to launch a school leaders mastermind. And I'm also in the process of putting together masterminds for business leaders as well as teachers. Now, without getting into all of the detail, because you didn't come here for a pitch on masterminds, but I just wanted to mention some basic ideas with you. A mastermind allows us to leverage the wisdom of others in our space in order to learn and to engage in growth exercises, and frankly, to sit on the hot seat and become the focus of attention from everybody else around the table. And that works on a rotational basis. So there are 12 sessions. It's a 3-month program. You're sitting together for an hour a week. I know it sounds like a lot, but it really isn't in the grand scheme of things. Think about it as an investment, not only in your future, but I would argue in your present, because we don't know what the future will bring. No matter what industry you're in, we don't know what the future will bring. We don't know how much more remote work we're going to be doing. We don't know all these various things, but at the same time, what we do know is that we're in it together, whether we're on the same ship, so to speak, or in different ships all rowing in the same common direction. Having the ability to share ideas, to get feedback, to set goals, to be vulnerable in a place and in a space where maybe we can't do that with our colleagues in the workplace, that is a very unique opportunity and gift. And especially for the school leaders, I am starting next week. I already have a nucleus in place, enough to launch it. So anybody else who wants to join, realize that there isn't a lot of space left, and we would love to have you if you are the right fit. So if you are not sure and you want to learn more, I will be linking up the pages a little bit later, but let me just include my email right now in the chat here. So go ahead and grab that if you want to reach out to me later. It's NH, which are my initials, at impactfulcoaching.com. You could reach out to me. You could just say, mastermind or more about the mastermind, something like this, include a phone number, and I will get in touch with you and we'll see if it's a good fit for you. Okay, so this is just that exciting news. I'm like beyond excited to share that with you. And hopefully I've communicated that well, since that's our topic today. Again, any questions, please do share. I'm just curious to know, by the way, not that you're committing to me at all by doing this, but with a range of 1 to 10, 10 being this was super motivating for me. I definitely want to get into this because I see the value in showing up every week and really learning, growing, sharing, building my network, all of that. That would be a 10. Like you're ready to jump right in at this minute, even not knowing all the details. A 1 is like, this is totally not my speed and I'd have zero interest in participating in this. I'm curious to get a feel for your current interest level, despite, again, recognizing that you don't have all of the details yet in place. So while you're filling that in, I do want to share with you a couple of links. This way, I see like 7s and above. That's fantastic. So please go ahead and find the link that is relevant to you. I just included it in the chat. Go ahead and click on the right one for you. I'll probably do it again because I see the chat's going to be moving here and I want you to be able to access it pretty easily. But the main thing is that if this interests you, if you're at a 7 or above, you must, and I mean that, you must go ahead and check out that link and see if this really could be a meaningful piece for you, especially now if we're getting into the summertime and we have a little bit more time, many of us, to work with. This is the ideal time, because when we're in the trenches, it is so hard to find the time and make it a commitment to do this kind of work. But now we've got a little bit of a clearing, and that is the perfect opportunity. We're so deep in the woods, it's time to get out and emerge and kind of like get back into the forest and see things from a different vantage point, as well as to open up and discuss the challenges we're dealing with. So thank you all for indulging me in that little, I'll use the Yiddish, that little spiel. Okay, and so now we're going to move forward with the actual presentation. Okay, now this looks like a bunch of technical jargon, but I'm hopeful that you can help me to tease out the intent, which is not, by the way, the implication here is not to say that human interaction is the same as testing a machine, as much as to say that the purpose of feedback, really the source of the word feedback, comes from the idea that if something is not going right, we can fix it. Now, I want to be clear that not all feedback should be corrective. It's very important to remember most of our feedback, in fact, should be reinforcing, should be positive in nature, should be complementary, right? You see somebody doing something, you want to tell them that they're doing it well, and on top of it, You want to be specific. I'll give you an example of a student, because all of us were students at one point in time or another. And frankly, many of us are still working with students, because I know there are a lot of educators on this call. So sorry, I'm just going to try to add a little bit more light over here because I see it's a little bit dark by my desk. Bear with me for just a moment. Anyway, so if I am walking into a classroom, I hope that that made it better, not worse, but it does have a tendency to create a bit of a flash in the back. We will play with it and we'll see. Anyway, so if I walk into a classroom and the kids are, quote, behaving, right? And I say, you guys are behaving great. Okay, what is the problem with that feedback? I mean, it sounds so nice, right? I love the way you're behaving. I love the way that you are ready to be a student. Okay, so Miriam, you are correct, and I'm sure others are going to be chiming in on this as well. It's a bit too general. We want to make it more specific. So instead of saying, and not focus on their actions, that's correct. Instead of saying, you guys are behaving great, I want to pinpoint and identify specifically what they're doing well so that I can get more of it. Thank you, Andrew. You want to focus on the behavior. On the action. We're going to talk about that a lot, actually, because one of the main things is we want to keep the feedback. When people see feedback as an indictment, if they see feedback as a reflection of self, especially if it's negative, it's going to be counterproductive. It's going to be, it's going to deplete them of their reserve, if you will, of kind of pushing through. So we want to give people the sense that you are totally fine, you are good. The behavior you're engaging with right now is not. Right, this has been very much in the news. I'm not here to get into politics or things like that, but we all know what's going on around us, right? There's probably nobody here who isn't within a few miles of major turmoil, right? All because of certain events that have occurred, as well as some deeply rooted historical elements there, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to dive into all of that. But again, we're looking at a bunch of behaviors, and we have to ask ourselves, what's the source of everything? What do I want to reinforce, and what do I want to change? And becoming more clear in how I communicate in times of tension, as well as times of normalcy. All of those make a difference. So we have to be very, very mindful of how we communicate and how do we give feedback, because the goal of the feedback is to either maintain really good things and motivate people to do even better, or to make adjustments that are going to correct a problem. Either way, by focusing on the behavior and providing clear guidance of what you like and what needs to be improved, the better the feedback will be. So that probably leads us already into the next item over here. I just want to show you, before you look at the actual question, you'll notice on the right side of this slide that there is a bar that runs from 1 to 10. I actually used it before when asking you about your interest in a mastermind. So this is called, or can be used as, what's called a scaling exercise. Scaling exercise, we've used it before in these webinars, if you're familiar with it, is that 10 is ideal, right? 1 is far from ideal. It's the exact opposite. So as we're thinking about the feedback process, let's focus for now on 10. Okay, if you could have the ideal in feedback, both in terms of how it's given, maybe how it's received, whatever you're thinking about right now, what would a 10 look like? Please do use the chat in order to share your responses. And everybody, please, I'm noticing some people towards the end only did an all panelists. Please adjust your settings if you haven't already to all panelists and attendees. What would 10 look like when it comes to excellent and ideal feedback? Okay, specific, attainable, measurable. Sounds like a SMART goal. All right, thank you, Miriam. Someone let's see here, someone is thriving and perfecting everything. Okay, Caitlin, if you could elaborate a little bit more, I'd appreciate it, because I'm not sure if that's coming from the perspective of what the person is doing as much as what we are sharing. Listen carefully, be slow to speak. I like that very much. I think it's Constance that wrote that. Okay, Paul, the right amount of feedback at the right time to the right person. That's like the $64,000 question, right? How do I create that right balance? Constructive, specific, and realistic. Okay, so we've got some great starts over here. what would a 10, what would a 1 feel like? Now, do me a favor, please, because there is a time lapse between when I ask a question and when information populates in my feed. At this point moving forward, please do like Ivanova did, which is put a number next to it. So if you're still responding to 10, I mean, it should be obvious, but if you're still responding to 10, please put that as a 10. If you're now responding to 1, just write the number 1 in there. Okay, clear and specific, observe practices, validation, be constructive, right? The goal here is to build, not to destroy. Okay, Kimberly, feedback would include specific details, right? Nice. Okay, provide opportunity to grow. Feedback is all over. This is a 1. Feedback is all over the place, not organized, no thought process. Warm and cool. Okay, I'm not sure, Ali, if you mean that those are the two extremes. Clarify, please, if you don't mind. And I see that you only replied to me. Okay, Paul, if you could reply to all panelists and attendees as well so everybody can see that. Ariel, 1 would not be specific. 1 would, not specific, not able to be measured, okay? So really the counter, the sort of the flip side of 10, all right? Feedback is clear, specific, useful. I'm assuming that that's a number 10. Unmeasurable and vague is a 1. All right, so we've got a lot to work with already. Daniel chimed in with punitive. Thank you, Daniel, for that. Jorge, scattered ideas and negative. All right, you guys are pretty good here. I think I'm going to hand the baton over to you guys soon. But in the interim, since I did organize this thing and I have control over the PowerPoint, I'm going to continue with the content. And please, again, I want you to push back as appropriate if you feel that anything I share is not coming across as caring sufficiently, and all the things we talked about as a 10, because that does matter. Now, here we're going to get into the strategies. When I do this live, I actually present scenarios. Scenario of a manager working with a direct report, for example. And those scenarios can be very powerful. Unfortunately, this type of environment, as well as the time that we have together, doesn't allow for that level of depth. I would certainly love to do this with you or your group. I actually just did this with a group in Chicago, a virtual presentation on giving and receiving feedback. So this is definitely something that we could be doing together in a deeper way with your group if you feel that is appropriate. Happy to have that conversation with you at your convenience. In the interim, so when we talk about sharing feedback, I'm now going to dive into a lot of the strategies. But before we go into them, I want to remind you of a very important framework that I like to use whenever it comes to building trust. Before I do, let's remember that you as the leader, I don't know if you're familiar with this quote. I wish I had it readily available, but by Chaim Janat, about the teachers who make the weather. Is anyone familiar with this? Right? You make the weather in your classroom, that you have the opportunity to hurt or to heal, these kinds of contrasts, if you will. And frankly, we are, as educators, for those of you who are educators, or frankly, if you're a leader of any environment, your workplace leader, virtual environment, it really doesn't matter. You set the tone, right? Culture begins with you. And just like we talked about culture when we did our presentation on delegation, that actually creating a delegation culture is a goal, right? You can't just assume delegation will happen if the culture doesn't support it. We have to remember that when it comes to communication, the same thing is true. Everything relating to leadership starts with the leader and starts with the culture that the leader helps to create. Of course, you don't do it by yourself, but you contribute to it in a significant way, because many people are inclined to follow the leader, literally, as it relates to not only technical behaviors, so in other words, the things you need to do the job, but also the kinds of interactions that you have. And it's become clearer and clearer over time that soft, human, interpersonal skills are the most critical elements that people need to succeed in today's workplace environment. It doesn't matter how much you know, because frankly, in most cases, I could be trained into almost any profession. I mean, they're not going to train me to become a heart surgeon, just on, in the ER. That's not going to happen. But for many positions, a person can and often does rise from, let's call it a clerical position, to CEO or to some other high-level executive because they had all the other stuff. The organizational skills, the communication skills, the people skills, whatever we're talking about. So often people will rise well above their formal education levels because of the fact that they know how to work with people. and they know how to interact and all of these things. And frankly, we have the same situation. Sometimes people could have tremendous, I have 2 master's degrees and a doctorate. I don't always behave like I do, but I do. Sometimes you could underperform your formal education. And so the question becomes, how do we strike the right balance of knowing the technical stuff, knowing how to do your job, as well as all the other pieces that support it? And many of us never learn these things in school. So as a leader, you have to remember that you are the one who creates the accountability. You're the one who creates the effective management. All of these things have to be communicated, and we need to tell our people that the goal of communication is to help you grow. It is not to catch you. Have you ever heard of, I'll just hold up the book, it's called The 1 Minute Manager. You might be familiar with this series. Ken Blanchard, right? Leadership and the 1 Minute Manager. Sorry, I've got my chat over here, so I can't even see what you can see fully. Let me hold it up again. Leadership and the 1 Minute Manager. Okay, so he talks about the idea, I think he calls it leave alone, zap, right? Leave alone, zap. And you've had that experience before where you're kind of moseying along and doing your thing and thinking you're doing a good job. And then all of a sudden, boom, comes the zap and you're told this is wrong and this is wrong and you need to fix X, Y, or Z. That happens because leaders aren't being careful to make communication ongoing. They're not careful to create the right kind of framework about what communication is all about and why we do it. So it's not just about an annual review or a quarterly review. It's about continuous growth. If you're not talking all the time, if you are waiting only for those reviews to share real feedback, then forgive me, but shame on you, really. Shame on you for doing that. And I don't mean to be condescending, because I here have to create the right kind of, culture and whatnot as well. But I hope you understand my point. We can't be waiting. I know we're busy and I know we have other things, but I will tell you the research is very clear that as important as the leader's own work is, the leader's role in supporting other people is significantly better. Think of it, more important, think of it as a lever, right? And the more is it called the fulcrum? I forget, the exactly, but the idea is that when you leverage your strength and you build upon the abilities and the time, the effort and the energy of your entire team, you can become an amplifier. And on the flip side, you can exponentially decrease their impact if your feedback is not constructive and not uplifting or not pointing people in the right direction, but creates fear, concern, etc., resentment, et cetera, et cetera. So you really set the tone. Don't be zapping your people, right? You have to do it in a way that's organic and natural and normal and healthy and helpful. Okay, so all these things are important. Just a quick notice that I see a couple of people are still with all panelists only on their chat. Please adjust to all panelists and attendees. And Caitlin and Jessica and Liz, I see your comments over here. Sorry if I'm not going to comment on all of them, okay? But this is important. Liz, we need to know what great looks like. We have to set that vision, and then we have to help our people move towards that vision. Excellent, and thank you for sharing that. Just one point further since I mentioned Ken Blanchard, and since I said that all of communication ultimately is based on relationships, let's take a look at the ABCD model. If you've been with me before, I've used it before. This is not something that's new for you, but I think every time I look at it, I see something additional. I'm just curious from your perspective, if you could please use A, B, C, or D for the purpose of the chat. Which of these 4 would you say is most important as a competency specifically for our topic of giving feedback like a boss? Is it A, B, C, or D? A is able, that you're competent. B is believable, you act with integrity. C is that you are connected and you care about others. D is dependable and you maintain reliability. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. These are great. I'll tell you what I'm noticing here, and then, of course, we can comment a little bit further. Alicia, if you could adjust your chat, I would appreciate it. All panelists and attendees. Almost everybody who replied said C. They were followed by some B's and a couple of D's. Now, I'm not saying there's right or wrong here, okay? This is personal opinion, first of all. And second of all, you can make an argument for practically all of them. Interestingly, I didn't see any A's, and I think that's for good reason. I will point out before I go further that from my vantage point, A and D are more about what we might call the technical skills of our work. In other words, the things that we do that are, I'm just going to turn this off for the moment because I'm seeing a lot of pulsating. Okay, if that's better in the grand scheme of things, great. If not, I can always put the light back on. But either way, the point for the moment is that able and dependable are typically relating to your ability to do the work, whether that's the actual work or the dependability that you will do the work. But it's the work itself. Believability and being connected are all about the interpersonal component, and they're not industry specific. So if I'm believable, if I act with integrity, you trust that what I say I will do will get done, and will get done in the right way, and I will maintain confidences, and I'll be honest. I'm not going to sugarcoat things because it's important for me to share things the way that they are. But at the same time, sort of tying into what we talked about, because a lot of people did link B and C, such as Jessica, and thank you for that, is that to be believable also requires me to be connected and demonstrate care, which, by the way, is easier for some people than others. Believe it or not, it's actually easier for some people. Not to say that not everybody can do it, everybody can, but it just makes me feel better because I identify as somebody who's a little bit less naturally empathic and more task-oriented. And there are different leadership styles or different personality styles. There's so much to think about when it comes to leadership. Knowing your own leadership style actually matters. Knowing how you come across actually matters. Now there is, parenthetically, sorry, I've changed web browsers since I last did this, so I don't know if I'll be able to easily find it, but there is a way to access, let's see if I can type this in real quick over here. There is a way to access a trust assessment. Here it is, Ken Blanchard Trust Assessment. Let's see if I can get it real quick. Okay. So this is a trust program. I think this is the one over here that I want. All right, I'm going to share that with you. I'm actually going to change my screen for share for the moment. Let's see over here if you can see this. Bear with me for a moment. Yeah, let's try this. Okay, so you should be able to see this trust assessment. I'm going to include the link in the chat actually now. Let's do that. Okay, so you have that as well. And you'll notice that you can self-assess, and you can also have others assess for you. And I would encourage you to do that. I know that that sometimes can be very humbling, and I'd be the first one to admit it's not always so easy to read what other people have to say. But I do this with many of my clients, helping them to understand how trusted and trustworthy they are with others in their workplace. And if you're a leader, you want to know, do people trust that when you deliver messages that you are being authentic and you're believable, that people, that you actually care, that you're connected with them, that they want to hear from you. Because as John Maxwell has shared, and I've shared this before in our conversations, right? The relationship with the leader is more important ultimately than the message of the leader. Of course, the message is important too. And if you're leading the people in the wrong direction, it's not very helpful. But people will follow somebody who they feel believes in them and who ultimately is considered a leader to them. People will not follow somebody otherwise. So you really have to be very mindful of your leadership and how people do trust you. Okay, back to I'm just going to bring this back to the PowerPoint so that we're back to where we were before. Let's see here. Okay, hopefully this works. Are you now able to see the PowerPoint again, the trust model? If you could just put a thumbs up, raise your hand, a yes, just want to make sure that I shared it correctly. Okay, great, hands are up, excellent, good. I see it, let's keep going then. Great, so I just want you to see this because I think it's really foundational to what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the time. Every strategy or every tactic can work, but we wanted them to be coming from a place of trust. We want them to be coming from a place of genuine connection. The more that we do, the better the interactions will be moving forward. Okay. And I did this as a little bit knowing that this slide was coming in full disclosure, because I have gotten brushback on this slide before, but at the same time, I continue to show it because I do think that there is a value here. So we have to, it's like caveat emptor, use what works for you, but understand that when you see something that is concerning to you, for example, you want to ask an open-ended question as opposed to either a yes, no, or make a statement, make a judgment. Okay, now what were you thinking sounds really bad. Okay, I think the intention over here is, I noticed this, tell me what you were thinking when that happened, or tell me what motivated you. That may be like more like number two. What caused you to X, Y, or Z? Okay, now the benefit here, I think, is pretty obvious, right? If I immediately kind of corner the conversation or the feedback in one way, it makes me feel like I've already been judged, and I can't, navigate through that. But if you create this space, number one, it gives me room to operate, and number two, it gives me a chance to be reflective. Right? We all make mistakes. I was just thinking about this the other day. I forget the name of the cop. Again, I don't want to play politics here, but imagine for a moment, I'm just trying to imagine for myself, if I was that person who had dealt with George Floyd in that aggressive manner. Obviously, we're not going to get into the details. I'd be ultimately personally horrified by my own behavior in the moment, but then think about, the bigger implications over here. Think about all of the other residual implications, for lack of a better term, about what's been going on. All of that from that one incident, right? Now, this is not your normal conversation. We're not going to typically be talking on that scale, but the idea is that sometimes we need to reflect on what we really were thinking, why we thought that was a good idea at the time, what alternatively could have been a better choice. And when you start with an open-ended question, you create space. That's really, I think, the point that I'm driving at here. You want to create space for thinking, not just for conversation. In fact, and somebody mentioned it in the chat earlier on, the real magic is in the reflection. The real magic is in the contemplation of process, sort of zooming out from the day-to-day and looking at it from that perspective. There's a person by the name of Brian Tracy. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's an older gentleman, but for years, maybe decades, he's been talking on time management and leadership and a variety of other key elements that help businesses and individuals succeed. And he has something called the Quink principle. I don't know if anyone knows what Quink stands for. Kwink. Does anyone want to take a stab at it? I think he's called the Quink principle, but definitely Quink. Okay, and while you're typing, in the interests of time, I'm going to share that the K stands for knowing. And I'll keep going, by the way, until I start to see some movement on the chat. Knowing, the W stands for what? Again, the full acronym is Quink, Kwink. Knowing what? Okay, Sharon, bear with me for a moment. Knowing what I now know. Knowing what I now know. So for example, he says, would you hire this person knowing what you now know? Like 5 years after you hired the person, for example, if you could do it again. Now, that's true for a boss considering staffing, but it's also good for almost anything, right? Sometimes we just do and we do and we do because we just show up and do it, and we don't take the time to reflect. Knowing what I now know, is this the right decision minimally moving forward? And asking open-ended questions provides the space to be open, to be analytical, to be honest and reflective, and perhaps to pivot if appropriate. So you look at that for a moment. I'm just going to read. Sharon, I see that you only wrote it to me, so I don't think everyone else can see it. I'll read the question. Everything you're saying is great, but what if you have to tell them the same thing over and over and over again? It is frustrating. How can one be nice each time after continuous repeating, especially when they think, I'm assuming that means when they're thinking, not looking. I'm not sure. Oh, if they think you're not looking. Okay. So, it's difficult to answer questions like this out of context. I'm not trying to avoid it. But I just want you to understand that, yeah, at some point, you need your people to get it. right? And if they truly don't get it, whether it's because they intellectually don't get it or because they're consciously, deliberately not getting it, you have some difficult decisions to make. It doesn't mean that the result of feedback is just more feedback. Sometimes the result of feedback needs to be assessment, evaluation, decisions, and some of those decisions can be difficult. Minimally, what you want to be able to do from an ethical standpoint, as well as from a legal standpoint, because let's be honest, we have to be concerned about the legal implications of our work as well. We want to be able to document that we did everything within our power, as well as know in our hearts as leaders that we did everything within our power to help a person grow for themselves, for us, for the organization, the company. We want to be able to give them the kind of feedback that they need to be successful and be able to hold our heads high and say, I was the very best leader I could be because. Now, there are extreme versions of this. There's the name of a company that I forget at the moment that has a policy that once they do a tremendously thorough vetting, it's not a school, it's a corporation. Maybe it's a startup, I forget. But they do a very thorough, comprehensive vetting process. Once they agree that somebody should be hired, they're an employee for life, pending, of course, or assuming that the other person wants to be an employee for life. But they have a policy that they will never fire someone. And so therefore, if somebody is not succeeding or performing well, they view it as their issue. They view it as their responsibility to remedy, to rectify, to, et cetera. I'm not suggesting that that be the norm here in this group. I'm simply saying that that is an extreme level of ownership that that really demonstrates what leadership can look like. But minimally, we want to know for ourselves that we did everything within our power to help people grow. Okay. Now, I like number 3 a lot because you start with a positive, not the sandwich effect. We'll come back to that later, but you start with a positive. What's working, right? Where are we being successful? How are you being successful? And then we talk about things where the challenges are. And Jessica, I see you only commented to me, but yes, if you think of everyone in your office as if they are family, then you will take a different approach, right? Being with family, I mean, I'll tell you honestly, just as a parent, I happen to have, thank God, 6 children and my wife, and we're all together. We're cooped up in one house. And we've kind of just been in this, I guess you'd call it quarantine or stay-at-home status for quite some time. And we can get underneath each other's skins. We've had multiple holidays, other times, the Sabbath. So for us, there's a lot of family time built in. It's just kind of like the fabric of what we have, but we don't have the diversions of getting out there and going through our regular business, school, et cetera, routines. So, and there have been times where I've wanted to, pull out my hair, whatever's left of it, and probably throwing out half the family and saying, go live somewhere else until you can get your act together. That kind of mindset. But you never do it because it's family. Now, again, I understand that there are differences, but if you fundamentally embrace the idea that somebody who's on your team is on your team till the very end until they can't be on your team anymore, because even with family, sometimes you have these difficult decisions, that will motivate you to try to find solutions rather than to point fingers. Now, Ali, I'm not exactly sure what kind of conflicting philosophies you're referring to. I guess it would depend on the circumstances. Minimally, I would talk those through. And as a reminder, everybody, please reply, all panelists and attendees, so everyone can see what you're asking or sharing. Philosophies do make a difference. I suppose that circumstance, like I said before, will factor in. Ultimately, it is the leader's job, is my perspective. It is the leader's job to lead, right? You have to be the leader. Now, it's helpful if you have values. It's helpful if you have certain standards in place. It's helpful if you've worked with your team already on the what ifs, because in many cases, the outcome of misbehavior or lack of performance or anything else would be obvious in that case, right? If one of our values is that we're going to show up and continuously support one another and all of this, and somebody's not doing it, clearly there's a misalignment from the values. And by the way, that's another way of creating a space between the behavior and judgment, because you've got an objective barometer upon which to measure or against which to measure. So if I've got a value and I've got a person who's not aligned with that value, clearly there's a gap between the two. I can speak to that and I say, we committed to doing this, you're over here, how do we bring you to the value? Because the value shouldn't change. It's the behavior of the individual that needs to change. right? And also, by the way we talk about people, I was just listening to Indistractable by Nir Eyal, the same idea that when a person is defined by who they are as opposed to a behavior that they do, then they're going to be more motivated to do the right behavior time and again. So if I see myself as responsible instead of somebody who does responsible things, it might sound like semantics and nuance, but really there's a fundamental difference. If I see myself, for example, when I was a teenager, I was a bit on the, I guess you'd say, the buff side. I was into working out and exercise and weightlifting and things like that. So I have this self-image that doesn't allow me to exceed, my waistline to exceed a certain amount of girth. I'm very mindful of that because that's how I see myself. And if you view yourself as a leader, if you view yourself as a team member, if you view yourself as a reliable person, if you view yourself as dependable, then anything that you are doing that's a shortfall, so to speak, from that objective, from that sense of self-identification, is ultimately going to motivate you to get more in alignment with who you really are. So as a leader, you can use, I know it sounds like a psychobabble technique of some sort, but reality is we need to understand psychology. We need to use psychology in our leadership every day, not to manipulate, but to motivate and to encourage. And if we can get our people to really think of themselves differently to the degree that that's necessary as part of our feedback, then we're going to really open doors that may have been closed until now. Okay, so here are some examples of open-ended questions. Let's take a look at some other techniques. And I'm curious to know, of all of these over here, which one would you like for me, since some of them are self-evident, which one would you like for me to elaborate upon? Let's start with everybody. Please just choose one that you'd like for me to talk more deeply in, either because it's not super clear or because you just want to hear more about what that is. I'm making some mental notes as I'm watching the scroll of the feed. Okay. So I'm going to keep watching them, but for now, I'm going to talk about number 3 and number 6. And then we'll talk about some of the other ones too afterwards. So tie feedback to goals. All right. So the idea here is that everybody should have personal goals that they are working on, whether it's a principal working with a teacher or a business owner working with an employee. No matter what your relationship is, everybody on the team should have goals. There could be collective goals like benchmarks, revenue numbers, things like this, academic numbers. And then there are personal goals, things that relate to professional practice, things I should be doing more of. And hopefully you understand how to create goals for yourself and how to help others set goals. We've talked about SMART goals in the past in these webinars and other types of goals. So helping people set goals is important, and then tying the feedback to the goal. So I'll give you an example from my own personal experience. I was a head of school, as I mentioned before. I had a head support committee. And one of the questions was, what should the focus be? I was a young principal at the time. I had succeeded somebody who had been in the business for much longer than myself, had really built the school from the ground up. There were a lot of different things that over the years needed to be attended to, and I was tasked to do them. But there wasn't real clarity about what all of those things were, as well as how to prioritize. And so things got sticky when there were conflicting ideas about whether I was doing a good job and how to measure that. So one of the ideas is to identify in this whole collection of different things that can be worked on, what are 2 or 3 things that are most important or most actionable, etc., and then make those the focus. So leaving aside all the other stuff, because you can't work on everything simultaneously, you identify certain goals for a quarter, for half a year, for longer, and then all of the feedback is tied specifically to the goals that you have set so that the feedback is useful, the goals continue to be a focus and a motivator and help the person to grow. if you are focusing on, let's just use an educator as an example, because I know we have many on the call. Let's say the goal was to improve classroom management, however that's ultimately defined. And I walk into a classroom and I observe things relating to instructional practice, but I don't focus on classroom management, then the teacher isn't getting feedback specific to her goals, and that's not as helpful to her. So we need to be thinking about that. Now, as far as putting personal, sorry about that, as far as putting personal feelings aside, to me, it's a relatively straightforward idea. It's not, there's not much to read into that. You know, we want to keep, we're all human beings. And so we're subjective, we're not objective. And when we're subjective, the more complicated it becomes for us to give good, useful feedback, because it's more about personal feelings. Now, if you are going to share feelings, because let's say somebody's doing something that's hurtful to you in some way, you might want to use the language of, when you do X, it's sort of like it's putting the behavior first, and here's the implication for me. This is how I feel as a result of this kind of behavior. So it's an easier message to communicate. But in general, you want to focus not on what is it about me, because people say, oh, she's only commenting because it hurts her, because it's not her style, or something like that. And then the message gets lost with the messenger, right? We want to make sure that the message is delivered. And if people are always focused on the messenger, then they don't listen to the message, right? You see that in politics all the time. If you don't like the politician, then no matter what they say, generally speaking, you're going to have a negative view on the message, because the messenger is someone you don't like. Conversely, if you're on the same side as that politician, even when their message is something you wouldn't fundamentally agree with or ascribe to, you will typically sway towards that because you're aligned with that person. So trying to separate the feelings from the feedback is important. Okay, now I'm just taking a look over here to see if there's anything else that deserves comment. It looks like those were the only two. Kimberly talked about not overloading. That's the comment on the side over here. As I mentioned before, when I was head of school, there was definitely the issue of overload. I felt it. And so it's helpful for everybody to be able to limit the amount of feedback to a couple of key areas. That's what our focus will be on for now. If we decide 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the road that we're going to expand it and or change it, that's our prerogative. We could do it then. But right now, we're going to focus on these things only. Otherwise, it doesn't end. Okay, now I do see 2 and 4. I'm assuming 2 and 4 are areas that you want me to comment on. If that's the case, I'm going to do that real quick. Be specific, don't generalize. We talked about that at the very beginning, right? The idea of going into a classroom and saying you're behaving well or not well, and being very general about it. Be specific about what you want to see or what you are seeing, so that the person can know to do more of it or to change it as appropriate. Describe the behavior, not the personality, right? I don't want to judge you as a person. I want to discuss what I see. So for example, if I see behaviors that are irresponsible, I don't want to judge a person as being irresponsible, saying these behaviors demonstrate a lack of responsibility. Or better yet, when you do this, I'm concerned that I can't rely on you for something else because of X, Y, or Z. So it creates a little bit more distance between the behavior and the person. Again, we want to avoid any person feeling attacked, any person feeling as if they are not valued. Because if that's the case, then without question, people are going to be much more discouraged from following up. Okay, so those are just some things to think about. Now, as we move towards the end, I do very much want to try to end this on time. In fact, I kind of need to, because I have a 2 o'clock call. I'm Eastern. Anyway, so stay in suggestive mode. Again, maybe, or you could, instead of you must or always, right? Would you think about, as opposed to do this? All right, that's number 1. Again, I want everybody to remember that we have to continually fold in trust building and relationships. So if it's going to come across as condescending, then even better language isn't good enough, right? We have to work on the foundation. Doesn't mean you can't be giving feedback as you build your foundation, but you want to prioritize the foundational building as you do your work, okay? As far as number 2 is concerned, you're probably familiar with something called the sandwich technique, which is praise, criticism, followed by praise, right? You do this well, I'm going to hammer you for this, and here's something else nice that you do, right? Everybody sees through that pretty quickly and easily. We want to avoid it. Okay, offer the tool as well as the observation. So if I'm observing something and I see that you're struggling, let's say with time management, well, however I phrase that, here's a tool for you to consider, right? I see that you're having a hard time coming in on time. Have you considered X, Y, or Z to get out the door a little bit differently, or scheduling of things like that? So when you have a concern, think about what tool would this person benefit from, that if you could share with them, they would already be able to take positive action. They may not use it. They may not use it, but at least they'll feel that you were kind enough to think about them. It's almost like the equivalent of having to let somebody go and trying to give some thought to how you could help them take a step forward in the next phase of their career. You don't have to do this, but it means a lot, and people see that you really genuinely care. Okay. Now, number 4 is absolutely critical for anything, whether it's feedback or not, right? You want to wrap up with a commitment. In fact, I'm going to actually ask all of you to do that as we're talking. What is something that we have talked about? You don't have to answer this now, but what is something that you are committing yourself to, of all the suggestions we've made, whether in the formal presentation or the things that I mentioned parenthetically, that you can commit to make subsequent feedback sharing more powerful, more meaningful, and more constructive in nature? Daniel, I think as I mentioned earlier, same concept related to a similar question that I had specific to when people don't hear your feedback or it's not resonating. There are times where you have to be a little bit more blunt, I suppose, right? In other words, if you can't get through in a quote nice way or in a soft way or whatever, you may need to change your approach. The goal ideally is to help this person see beyond the limitations, see beyond their behavior at the moment, get them to a better place. If none of that works, you have a difficult decision to make, but we all have it. And that's just part of the nature of being a leader. And you have to recognize that some people just won't get it. And will those people, are they valuable enough to keep them on board? And if not, you like I said, you have a difficult decision, but sometimes you just have to make that. Carol, if I could encourage you, to adjust your chat to all panelists and attendees. And Daniel, I apologize before if I didn't share that properly for you, but it's a wonderful question, a very important question, and something all of us really need to be thinking about on a regular basis, because frankly, we have this experience. We get frustrated. I told it to you, and I told it to you, and I told it to you, and you aren't listening. And it's frustrating because I want you to succeed. And it's so easy for me to see. So why can't you see? Right? That kind of thing. And I know it tears at our hearts because we don't want to do anything other than to build and support. And it becomes difficult when people aren't aligned with us. And you just kind of want to grit your teeth. So I'm not here to offer silver bullets and comprehensive, use my magic potion for a week and all your problems will go away. It's obviously not the case. But what is relevant is that if you have more tools in your toolkit and you're building trust and you're doing all the foundational pieces, minimally you can say to yourself, I did everything within my power to do the right thing. And in most cases, if people have their heads screwed on right and they're open to listening and they want to improve as professionals, you will get through. And if you can't, you can't. Okay, let's talk about EARN for a moment. EARN is just an approach to be mindful of as you think about giving feedback. EARN is an acronym. It stands for event, action, result, and next step. So what was the situation? What did you observe as a behavior? What was the impact or consequence of that behavior? And then what are the next steps that you want to see beyond this point? What needs to be continued? What should be changed? So here's one. And again, in full disclosure, I got kind of taken over the coals with this group recently on this particular example. If it's coming from a position of trust, I think it's much more palatable. But meanwhile, minimally, we want to also infuse a lot of empathy in there, especially nowadays, because as I said at the beginning of our presentation, I know I haven't showed you the example yet, but at the beginning of the presentation, I talked about that this is more important than ever because we're more distant, we're more disrupted. People are working from home in many cases. They're working with their kids around. They don't have quiet spaces. I'm doing this in an open basement. I had to throw up a couple of people out of here in order to have a relatively quiet space by which to do this. And that engendered resentment. There are real issues. We're not going to share them all, but they're real issues. I'm sharing obviously a little bit more, but you get the idea, right? So you have to, as leader, be mindful of all of this kind of thing and say, how can I help? Right? Is there anything I need to know that's going to make the situation better? What would you like to tell me that you haven't yet, that you would tell if I was, let's say, a friend of yours about the situation, that we could ultimately make it better? So I'm demonstrating a deeper level of empathy. Once that's in place, then we can talk strategy because we're on the same team. And that's an important element. But let's get tactical, because like I told you before, my personality is such where I like to just solve things. So here we go. All right. So here's the problem. Yes, at yesterday's or during yesterday's weekly team meeting, of course, this is now a virtual meeting. What happened? You answered your phone and stepped away. Now, what was the problem with that? What did that produce or result? When we have time set aside for meetings, it's important that you be present and focused. And by stepping away to take a call, you are neither. So I just like dropped the hammer there. Again, you have to be careful how you say it. Your nonverbals, by the way, are huge. We've discussed this, right? The tone, the way you look into a camera, if it has to be camera-based, your use of hands and other nonverbals, all of those matter. So it's not the words. Words are only 7% of how we communicate. The other 93% is tone, inflection, physical spacing, physical posture, all these kinds of nonverbal elements that frame and provide context for the actual words that are shared. Don't forget that, and remember that even more so now, because we don't have the wherewithal to capture a lot of the communication context that we normally have. So I can give you a pat in the back if I'm next to you. I can sort of knock and smile and be in your space. And maybe I don't even communicate every time, but when I walk past your office, I do some kind of gesture that demonstrates that I care about you. I can't do any of that because we have to call in every time we're communicating, or we're using email, text, or other things that are not capable of replicating that level of connection. So remember that as you do anything, especially nowadays. And then the last one is, how would you feel? Here's a solution. Here's a suggestion. Here's a possibility. Leave your phone somewhere. Maybe only check it in emergency. Or if I see you checking the phone, what should I think? Right? How can I support you? This kind of thing. So it creates a framework around the behavior and how to improve it moving forward. Okay? The benefit of earn as a concept is that it's structured, it's focused with an emphasis on actionable feedback, and it removes the emotion to a large degree from the feedback, because it's, this is what I saw and this is what it produced, and this is something that we want to avoid moving forward. So it creates an opportunity to have a conversation without making it, you are, some kind of judgment. So, because that's the kind of thing we want to avoid. Now, there is no context for practice here. So what I'm going to ask you instead for practice is to do what I mentioned before, and that is to share something that you are going to commit to, something that based on either because it's new for you or a reinforcement of something you're already doing. And I did get, by the way, I noticed here, see, shame on me because I'm not going to be the recipient of the earn thing, but I happen to notice on my phone that some of you already started to email me about the mastermind. So I do want to just again include my email address for anybody who wants to jump in. We are almost full, at least when it comes to the school leaders one, so I don't have a lot of space, and I'm only looking for people who are ready to show up, do their very best work, be part of an awesome team, build their networks, learn, scale, grow, amplify, you name it, we're going to do it. But you need to be the right person for it. And you need to be able to, like I said, show up and really provide the environment and the contribution that the team demands. It's my responsibility to create the very best team I can. So that's my email address. Those are the links to the mastermind. At this point, please put into the chat what you are committing to, like Kimberly did already. Okay, constantly utilize lead questions, allow individuals reflection, provide connection. Wow, it's a mouthful and it's awesome. And I thank you for that, Kimberly. Everybody else, I would encourage you please to also share your ideas. While you're doing that, I'm going to put a few more links into the chat, which you may find useful. Anything that I can do to help you in the area of education, right? Whether that's a professional development training, you're probably already thinking about that if you're an educator or a school leader, or just general, if you have a business and you want to help your team grow in a variety of ways, just hang out on my website for a couple of minutes. There's a lot of free stuff that I'm giving out that I think is just awesome. There's just like so much here, honestly, to share with you. I'm going to drop a couple of things in and then I'm going to explain it if you don't mind. This way you get a sense of what all this stuff is. First of all, what I just included here is a link to my book. For those of you who want to go deeper in leadership, I must tell you, this is the book I wish I would have had when I was starting out. It's actually the book that I wrote. Since then, it's called Becoming the New Boss. There's a link to it in the chat on Amazon. I would encourage you to take a look and see if it's something that would serve you, because I think, short chapters, actionable stories, I think it's the kind of thing that could really serve. And it's not just for school leaders at all. For those of you who are dealing with stress and want to manage it, I linked up an ebook link there, productivity blueprint, productivity assessment, a link to my YouTube channel as well for all past webinars that you might have missed, as well as other goodies that I'm uploading on a regular basis. Please subscribe, because this way you will get all of that content. Back to what Carol said over here. Thank you, Nicole, for being here, by the way. And Carol, in response to being on the Balanced School Board. Okay, yeah, important stuff. Thank you for sharing that. Please repost it, Jessica, you as well, and Nicole, that everybody can see your responses, because right now I think I'm the only one who is seeing it. Okay, so to recap, communication ultimately at its core is about trust, it's about relationships, but you also need a process. And if you have a process that is objective, that is focused on solutions, that's based on values, that's going to help people move the needle because they recognize that you care deeply and you want to give the feedback for them to grow and for your whole organization to grow, the receptivity level will be much greater, the actionability will be much higher, and you will see a real uptick in performance. So I hope that this was meaningful to you, and I hope that you will continue to stay in touch with me. If I could be helpful to you, you have my email address, and I guess that is it. So I want to thank you all for being here. I have not yet set a schedule for future webinars. Just out of curiosity, maybe you could just answer this before we go. How often should I be presenting webinars moving forward, assuming that I do this through the summer? What's the frequency that would serve you? Are we talking once a week, twice a month, twice a week, right? How often would be a good frequency for you? Okay, it seems like twice a month, once a week, once every other week. Okay, evenings are better. All right, so anyone, by the way, if you can't make something, just register, you'll get the recording, but it seems like every 2 to 4 weeks is the range over here. I'm probably gonna start the twice a month thing based on your feedback. That's pretty neat. And if we do it more often, we do it more often. We'll see. Sometimes I get some guest presenters as well. Thank you again. It means a lot to me that you showed up, and a lot to me that you shared this. And I look forward to engaging with you that much more in the future. Have an awesome day, and we'll talk soon.